A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back once again to video games that are totally awesome. I feel like for this particular instance, having talked a lot more about the Batman Arkham games, yet Arkham Origins has yet to truly be inducted into this channel. I have in fact made some commentary about it before, mostly on social media. Ever since quitting it though, it's practically undone that kind of work that I put into. It's about time that I do put YouTube on the forefront based on having an official Batman Arkham Origins summary and my own rating given to this game. Because let's face it, if there's one thing that most people might know about me, I happen to be quite the sucker for origin stories. I mean, look at how much excitement I showcased when Bardock Alone Against Fate came out in January 2023, and then late 2024, there was Mufasa, the Lion King. These origin stories, though, are just a few known examples of more recent media that ties to the originality of the storyboards of various franchises. With Arkham Origins, I actually did give out a very similar vibe. I'm definitely a sucker for these types of origin stories. You might even recall when I reviewed A Quiet Place Day 1. Yeah, that movie came out last June. I did give it a pretty good rating for what it was. It's a good origin story telling us how the apocalypse started with those Sensitivo creatures. At least that's what I dubbed them. If they have an official name, I guess I might have jinxed myself. But that is what I'm sticking to nonetheless. Back to Batman Arkham Origins though. This was actually a unique contrast to what we saw in the previous two games because for one thing, this was at the turn where PlayStation 3 was about to jump ship to PlayStation 4. And being that this came out a couple months before the official release of the PS4 had come around to the marketplace, which happened by Christmas 2013, in the States at least. A lot of us have been able to at least fill in the time with a lot of the PlayStation 3 lineage stuff still going onwards. And alongside Batman Arkham Origins, a few other games came out in 2013 that I've remembered quite well. And even beyond 2013, I still continue to play with the PS3 for some time, for eventually having myself the PS4. In any case though, Arkham Origins, released in 2013, was at the time probably top 5 best origin stories regarding modern media that I recall. While we don't exactly have Kevin Conroy, for instance, voicing Batman, because this time around it's Roger Craig Smith, the same guy whom had gotten famous over the years for voicing Sonic the Hedgehog, and less than a year before Sonic the Hedgehog would jump ship to a brand new TV show called Sonic Boom. Either way you look at it though, Smith voicing Batman rather than Conroy, it didn't exactly seem like a great choice, but the way I see it, this is a younger Batman we're dealing with. This is several years before Batman Arkham City, and in turn, a younger voice would have been necessary. The story itself, though, does start with Batman fighting Killer Croc, and it's almost right off the bat where we got ourselves a literal boss fight within only an hour of gameplay that is settled on. Killer Croc, of course, is taken away into custody while Batman is able to fly away in the Batwing. Of course, we can't forget to mention that you have yourself the Commissioner, Jim Gordon, whom was at the time a man in charge of the police force of GCPD. And he was technically the man who was solely wanting to capture Batman and bring him in for a number of different crimes that were committed, mostly against criminals. But the fact is, this sort of vigilante behavior that Batman exhibited was very much so to the point where he was able to outsmart Gordon and his forces many times over. Even Gordon's own apprentice, if you will, he did basically call him out on claiming that there was no such thing as a Batman. But hey, right in front of him, that's exactly what happened. And this Batman was well equipped with technology and tactical maneuvers, the likes of which the GCPD had never seen before. Of course, these guys do become a repeat throughout the entire story. After all, how else was Jim Gordon going to listen to Batman's advice and eventually team up with him to take down all the super criminals of Gotham City? Well, anyways, Batman does, of course, make his way over to the Batcave. Butler Alfred Pennyworth, whom had become quite the staple over the years in the Batman Arkham games, mostly with the likes of Arkham City, where he, alongside Oracle, were discussing various things with Batman, giving him advice, giving him tips, as well as arranging augmented reality training for him. But in Origins, Alfred Pennyworth, while he does technically play a bit of a role in terms of communication dialogue between Batman and him for the most part, there's also the likelihood that with Alfred's skill in operating the computer systems in the Batcave, much like Bruce Wayne himself, the two practically make a good duo. A little wild for the ways of Batman and Robin, but still, they do make a fine team, able to take down these super criminals and, of course, make justice possible in Gotham. However, the main thing that we get here is the introduction of Black Mask's 8 assassins. These 8 assassins are no joke. You got yourself Deathstroke, Firefly, Copperhead, Bane, Killer Croc, Electrocutioner, and then, of course, there's 2 pretty bad ones there. But we will get to those in a moment here. The thing is, these are 8 super criminals that Black Mask has hired in order to kill the Batman. And in return, they claim high fame as well as riches of up to $50 million in payment by Black Mask himself. This was, in fact, not just any bounty that they set up. This was a means to practically exploit Batman in whatever ways possible, and at the same time, maybe allow the GCPD to take care of him. The fact is, though, is that Batman in this game, he is dealing with so much more resistance than he had ever faced before. It might have been a lot simpler nowadays, but back then, it was quite hard to convince the GCPD that he was on their side, and more importantly, the fact that he had so much opposition thrown against him, that really is quite a challenge for him to face. But being a young age, he was likely able to do a lot more of this in so little time. Let's not forget, this is the very same Batman whom had been trained by ninjas, members of the League of Assassins, and he had also had experiences in battle for a pretty long time. And a lot of combat, tactical movements, and other such training that made him quite the opponent in battle. The ultimate goal, though, in the end, is to bring down Black Mask and take in all 8 of these super criminals to justice. However, it would turn out to be way uglier than Batman himself would have predicted. Because while Killer Croc was relatively easy to dispose of, the same can't quite be said for the other 7 in mind. Because, first off, we do get some other characters along the way. Because once we go up against Electrocutioner and then try to track down the Penguin, well, Electrocutioner was surprisingly easy to beat. Just drop kick him in the face. That's all you had to do. He definitely is quite a wimp and a throwaway character, which, a little disappointing, but in the end it actually does work out in its own favor. But then, of course, we go up to Penguin. Penguin, of course, is one of those whom somehow knows about Black Mask, and while Batman does his best to beat him up and force him to give out words, Lacey Towers is something that comes off of Penguin's mind. Supposedly, that's a good clue for Batman to work with, but before he can get more information from Penguin, Deathstroke shows out of nowhere and blindsides him, forcing him to fight. So Batman and Deathstroke, I gotta be honest with you guys, it's probably the greatest boss battle I might have ever played in DC gaming history. Like, way better than a majority of the other Batman Arkham games. I mean, you got a lot of the incredible tactical movement, a lot of quick time events that are not exactly made by button commands, Although it does retain the sort of button mashing that the Ra's al Ghul battle had, like when Deathstroke throws flashbangs at you and then tries to beat you down with his pipe weapon, basically like a staff. But much like how Ra's al Ghul had tried to slice up Batman with his sword, you definitely gotta really tap down on the button in order to defend against his attack. And then you throw a stun at him and then beat him down. Yeah, just like in Ra's al Ghul. It's nice that they were able to retain some of the old playability as well as styles of the boss battles, so that way it doesn't feel too different and therefore it's easier to work with. But then of course the gameplay does change, because there's a point where Batman takes a hold of the staff and destroys it by slamming against his knee, bending it. So what do we have here? We have a sword that Deathstroke now wields. Every hit that he takes on you will actually inflict more damage than with the staff. So this pipe weapon, while it was a blunt object, it wasn't too crazy and all, but the blade is even worse. However, they do keep the formula the same in terms of disabling his attacks and then counterattacking him. Of course, when he throws flashbangs and tries to beat you down with his weapon, you definitely got to defend yourself and then stun and then beat down, just like normal. Eventually, when the fight does end, Batman does throw the blade towards Deathstroke, narrowly missing him in the head and then knocking him down to the ground. Penguin relieves Batman, and that's pretty much it. We don't really see Penguin for some time after this point. So it's fair to say that while we were able to easily defeat Electrocutioner and Deathstroke, we'll just say that the Electrocutioner guy does come back later on. But we don't have to worry about him for a while anyways. Of course, we definitely can't forget to mention that while most of the other criminals are also fairly challenging in their own unique way, like we could, for example, talk a bit about how we were eventually led to some poison gas, which it seems familiar to you. Remember Arkham Asylum? And even the same deathly grin is showcasing on some people's faces. Yeah, it's a bit of a sign of things to come. But we certainly want to get to the point where Roman Sionis is eventually captured by Batman, interrogated, and Sionis goes on some crazy rant about a guy called the Joker, basically disposing of a lot of his men, turning them against him, and stealing from him, and even murdering his own woman. So, to think that Batman would kill is a bit overkill, you know? But they really do ramp up the level of threats in this game compared to the others. It felt like child's play in the previous two games. Here in Arkham Origins, though, they definitely take the threats a bit more seriously. And they definitely give out ones that might feel a little more on the intimidating factor. Nonetheless, though, Copperhead comes out of nowhere and poisons Batman, forcing him to endure a number of different hallucinations. It's a pretty freaky way to go here. I mean, remember when he was dying as a result of Joker's blood sample infection in Arkham City on his way to the League of Assassins? And then, of course, he was able to slightly treat his infection with basically a goblet full of Lazarus. In this case, though, Alfred is able to arrange an antidote for Copperhead's venom. And when Batman takes it, this is also a unique boss battle. There's times where Copperhead will duplicate herself or sneak up against Batman, and there's points where the soundtrack could actually hint as to where she is, and she'll come at you with a full-blown strike. There's a lot of unique tactics that this character pulls together. She's a rather fast and agile opponent for Batman to face. The funny thing, though, is that according to the pile that Batman pulls up, it registers Copperhead as more of a male, not a female. Which, I don't know if that's just some silly typo they put up. But, nevertheless, Copperhead is defeated, and well, she does hint to Batman about the Joker's whereabouts. But, obviously, he is the one who practically knows more than anybody else. Because of his Batcave stuff, that's all. Anyways, though, there's also the point where we do eventually become led to a point where in a large tower, Joker is apparently gathering a meeting with the remaining assassins. Firefly, Bane, Electrocutioner. Well, most of the other guys were easily handled, including Deathstroke and Copperhead. We can't quite say the same sort of thing with the rest of the guys. Because Electrocutioner, the fact that he was easy to take down is one thing, and the fact that he wasn't taken away is another. But then, of course, he's up there in that meeting. Apparently, Black Mask is leading the whole thing, and Joker is revealed. Yeah, so the Black Mask guy is apparently Joker in disguise. A nice little nod to how the opening of The Dark Knight took place. And keep in mind, that was 5 years ago at the time. And now it's been 17 years since The Dark Knight came out. And 12 since Arkham Origins came out. So, quite a bit of a time leap, don't you think? Anyways, though, the Joker and Electrocutioner do get a bit of heat, if you will, as Joker just pulls out his gun and starts firing rapidly and gets a bit on the flamboyant side, just as he normally would be. I'd say here he's a bit more on the insane side of things. He does force Electrocutioner into a chair and, surprise, surprise, kicks him out the windmill, causing him to fall to death. He lands on a chandelier not far from where Batman is at, and, well, that's apparently how Electrocutioner dies in the game. Yeah. Just when you thought a rematch could have happened where Electrocutioner would be even more powerful, why put him up as a main boss if this is all we had here? Again, there's just some things about the game that are a bit disappointing, more so than the rest. But much like with Arkham City, there are a good variety of different objectives that you can complete just as well. For instance, another one of the main assassins, Deadshot, Floyd Lawton, is also an optional quest that you can put together. The thing is, with all 8 of the assassins, they have their own unique powers and their own unique skills and their own unique tactical moves that they can use to exploit Batman's weaknesses and finish him off for good. But with Deadshot here, it's more or less the same sort of thing as with Arkham City's missions here. But unlike that, you aren't really tracking down political prisoners that Deadshot had taken out. But in Arkham Origins, you're just simply going to the Gotham City Bank, in which a number of hostages are inside, as well as some of Deadshot's own minions. And it's basically a simple sort of stealth mission where you gotta take down the thugs, and then eventually Deadshot himself is a person that you can sneak up against and then incapacitate. Just like that. And that's how you beat Deadshot in Arkham Origins. Whereas here, with Arkham City, it's a bit about tracking Deadshot first and then taking him down. So, not quite as elaborate as the last game, but I'd say it still does a pretty good job. It's kind of a shame that it's an optional quest here. I mean, should they made it part of the main quest? Or the main game itself? Who really knows? Anyways, though, the Joker does dispatch the others at the tower, especially Firefly. Bane decides to stick around, though, and wait with him for Batman to show up. And that's exactly what Batman ends up doing, because later on, he gets up into the top floor of the tower, the elevator gets broken in by Bane, by surprise, and he is able to knock out Batman and put him in front of Joker, where the two will exchange a couple of Christmas gift exchanges. Yeah, Joker basically picks out a random detonator for some explosive devices he has set up in Gotham, and it apparently blows up a large skyscraper nearby. Wow. That is insane. Talk about the Joker truly committing to mass genocide and blowing up entire buildings just to prove his stature. Right in front of Batman, even. Obviously, Batman's not going to take that stuff lightly. At all. And while Batman is forced to subdue Joker and bring him in, Bane, of course, is ready just as well. So this prompts us to take our first battle with Bane, wouldn't you know? And, well, the crazy thing is that we are able to take on Bane. He is able to charge at us in many ways. He is able to use his brute strength in order to induce a lot of damage. There's plenty of times where you can't quite attack him head on. But there are eventually points where you can knock him down, especially by utilizing the old techniques that we saw with the Titan enhanced inmates of the previous games. With Bane though, it does work slightly different than the rest. You still have to take down other thugs just as the same would be. And when you are finally able to defeat Bane, all that happens is, well, it's basically just one battle with Bane. And there's actually a few more that happen throughout the rest of the game, making Bane a pretty formidable opponent throughout the whole story of Arkham Origins. Of course, they do get on helicopters, and while Joker and Bane do try to work things out, the police also show up. They're able to gun down most of the inmates, and Joker is still swinging wildly with his machine gun. A rocket is eventually fired into the building, causing Joker to fly outward. Batman goes after him, and the two basically fall what is supposedly to their deaths, but instead they're able to break their fall slightly by landing on whatever things they could as they enter through another building. Falling to the ground, it's crazy how they were able to survive that. But Joker, man, he really didn't want Batman to save him, right? Yeah, it's kind of a weird change of pace when you realize that Joker used to be suicidal, but apparently now he's not. At least with the first two games, that's exactly what happens. He never once made suicidal attempts. But in this game, he practically made it so. I guess it was just a means to test Batman and what he was going to do to him. Of course, Batman does successfully capture the Joker and leave him for the GCPD to pick up. And just in time too, because they were practically surrounding Batman just the same until he makes his escape through the roof into the Batwing. He of course makes his route back home, but then eventually discovers that Bane has himself a secret hideout. And it turns out, oh man, Hugo Strange, like I said, is not the only one who has deduced Batman's identity, but apparently Bane had secretly been doing the same thing. And this was way before then, let's keep that in mind. But of course, Batman certainly is not going to let that slip by either. He wants to take care of Bane once and for all, and to find a way to clear up this whole secret identity exposure conspiracy. But before he can do that and make his way back, the news shows up. Apparently Firefly is still on the loose, hoping to bring down the Gotham City Bridge. And this large bridge is rigged to blow. 4 bombs are inside, ready to be detonated by Firefly himself. Batman makes his way up to the surface from where he's at, and eventually gets to the bridge, in which he notices Firefly swinging around with his jetpack and wielding his flamethrower. And of course, while the main goal is to defuse all the bombs and prevent them from blowing up, destroying the bridge, sending it down to the bottom of the river, the GCPD, however, are more or less trying to accomplish the same thing. The two don't seem to cooperate too well. A fire door does need to be opened, and the GCPD seem to be the only guys who were able to do that. But eventually, Alfred is able to get into the network and open the door up for him. So that way Batman can get to the last bomb after getting the other 3 taken care of. Of course, he encounters Firefly again along the way, and turns out we have yet another boss battle on hand. And during that boss battle, Firefly tries to use his detonator, but it looks like the bomb squads at GCPD were able to defuse the last bomb just in the nick of time, leading Firefly to become very frustrated and fighting Batman some more. Of course, there is a specialized grenade which uses glue instead of Mr. Freeze's technology. Yeah, this was a little while before Mr. Freeze would truly become a ferocious threat for Batman. Of course, there is a DLC of Mr. Freeze in this game just as well. But more on that later. Anyways, though, it's also fairly easy to deal with as long as you know Firefly's pattern. You gotta avoid his flames for the most part, especially when things start to burn up or he uses his flamethrower against you. Eventually, Batman is able to disable his jetpack, causing him to spin out of control, and eventually Batman is able to beat down Firefly and have him hang from a rope. The GCPD find him, take him down, and bring him into custody, while Batman throws off the detonator towards Gordon, and he picks it up, and the two exchange a little chat on how things should have been different between the two of them. And it's quite obvious that the two worked out pretty good together, even if it was unintentional. They basically covered this whole thing like it was nobody's business. Batman defused 3 of the 4 bombs, while Gordon handled the last one, and just before Firefly pressed that button. So, solid teamwork. But we certainly can't forget to mention that the Joker had a little exchange with Harley Quinzel. Yeah, this was sometime before she became the infamous Harley Quinn at Blackgate Prison. And also, this was a little while before that fire broke out, causing Blackgate prisoners to be transferred to Arkham Asylum. Like I've said, since this takes place years before all that stuff, a lot of things are pretty much different. But then, of course, Batman once again makes his way back. Bane, however, patches through to him in the communication system and tells him that he's taking care of the Batcave for him. And even Alfred is barely left alive. Obviously, Batman is pretty mad. So he goes back there and is able to find Alfred possibly dying. He realizes that the electrocutioner's shock gloves could probably resuscitate him. And thankfully, they do. Batman realizes that because of how formidable Bane is now, he can't just simply take on these guys anymore. Even though he was able to defeat most of the assassins with ease, Bane was unlike anything else. And the Joker was practically on edge at that point. So on edge that there actually was a big riot that broke into the Blackgate prison, and Joker was able to easily break free from all this, and more so, the entire prison was now under his control. There was nobody that could stop him, except for Batman. So, Batman is encouraged by Alfred, even though he discouraged him at first. And this was, of course, before he managed to discover Bane's secret hideout and the deduction of Batman's own identity from Bane's perspective. But this time, Alfred's practically had a change of heart, knowing that Bane had come after him and practically left him in critical condition until Batman saved him just in time. This was definitely a revelation that Batman needed to get up and out there again, to go to Blackgate Prisoner and stop the Joker once and for all. His second round with the likes of Joker and Bane, unlike with the Tower, it's even more crazy and a bit more of a challenge here. Because once Batman does make it to Blackgate Prison, he discovers that the Joker is there with good old Commissioner Gordon. And well, when all that stuff is put together, as well as Warden Joseph, yeah, it sure is quite a sight. But let's not forget here that Joker still does hold this sort of intent on suicide, despite Batman not wanting any of it. The Joker apparently is going to use an electric chair, and it's going to be powered by a battery which is connected to a heart monitor that Bane clips onto his body. And the thing is, this challenge is more about Bane versus Batman, but at the same time, it's also about preventing the Joker from becoming electrocuted to death. The thing is, Batman is in quite the pickle here. He wants to take down both Bane and Joker rather than kill either of them. But the thing is, this is just an ultimate reputation test. Is Batman truly going to be known as a killer? I mean, it was one thing where Batman had to invade the GCPD and counter Barbara Gordon, whom relayed some helpful information to him about getting into the GCPD's frequencies. But there was another thing where he encountered Jim Gordon himself, as well as a member of the team known as Brendan. But then, of course, we got to understand the fact that while Batman certainly has no intent on killing anybody, Gordon doesn't know that. Neither does Warden Joseph or any of the other guys associated with Gotham itself. But this whole test of trying to get Batman to kill somebody really is not going to work out for him. That's for sure. And our main goal here is to incapacitate Bane as good as we possibly can. And while Original methods don't quite work as well. The conventional tactics as well as fighting don't quite seem to work all too well because they definitely allow for Bane to gain heart rates. And the thing is, with every heartbeat he puts in, it charges up that battery. And it makes Batman a bit concerned. There eventually, though, comes an idea of which he can use the shock gloves to basically put Bane into a cardiopulmonary arrest. And what that simply means is that after beating down Bane for some time, putting enough volts through his body, he is able to be unconscious for some time. The heart monitor is easy to rip off without causing any more trouble. Now, Joker, obviously, he had gotten his hands on not just the Warden, but also Commissioner Gordon by this point, as Gordon did try to stop these guys, but ended up getting himself captured and held by the neck. Yeah, the two were practically going to be fried to death if Batman didn't do anything. But since he did, he was able to thankfully let go of Gordon and even put a bullet in him. But thank goodness Gordon had a vest on him, preventing him from dying, of course. Batman, of course, is able to convince the likes of both Gordon and Joseph to help stop the Joker. The two eventually do agree after realizing that Batman's true intentions were not of killing anybody, especially after learning that Bane was somehow still alive after all of that shock. Yeah, Batman does go to resuscitate him, but Bane has little surprise. A certain drug is pumped into his body. It turns out it's essentially an experimental form of special venom that is able to truly bring out Bane's ferocious capabilities. This drug, dubbed as TN1, apparently was an experimental form of the venom cocktail that Bane had been using for years to amplify his power and, of course, to modify his body. Defeating Batman now seemed like a bit of a cakewalk. Because while Batman and Bane are now in some old catacombs underneath the prison, some electrical relays are around, which thankfully Batman can use as a tactic in order to shove Bane into, and by utilizing various sneak attacks as well as the nearby vents underneath, he is able to drive Bane to a point where, eventually, it seems like he's down, but then Bane slams him against the wall, throws a lot of punches his way. And thankfully, Batman has a quick idea. By utilizing his Batclaw, he is able to create a line that electrocutes Bane when he runs into it, truly incapacitating him. Batman once again hoists him up by a rope to prevent him from escaping, while he goes after the Joker. He does encounter Gordon once again, and the two actually exchange a few blows with some of the inmates nearby. And so you could tell that teamwork is truly evolving between the two. In addition to Gordon lending his trust over to Batman to take care of these bad guys, it seems that the two actually do great fist to fists with the other inmates, proving once and for all that Batman doesn't really need to do everything on his own, but Gordon could probably help him just as well. Eventually, the Joker is apprehended after being found in the chapel. But the thing is, this is where a lot of Joker's old speeches tend to become a bit dull. I mean, he practically lets Batman know that he is proud of him for killing Bane, but after realizing he's still alive, he thinks that it's not funny. After a number of different words happen to be exchanged, and as well as some blows from Batman, we are eventually led to the point where all of this sort of annoyance stuff that Joker is trying to teach to us, all this insanity that he has gotten through to him at this point, especially learning after what we saw from the Blackgate prison when he and Harleen had a bit of an interview. That was quite a unique experience. But in this instance, the kind of hallucinations that Joker saw, especially because we see his eyes contort and Batman is just some weird monster to him. But we know Batman. He is vengeance, the knight, a hero of justice at Gotham. Knocking Joker out cold was easier done than said, with one more punch. This is where we once again have Gordon come by, letting Batman know that even after all that's happened, he still intends on taking him in. Batman has to disappear once again. But then Gordon does come to the realization that maybe the others were right about him. Batman was not some threat that Joker found, or Gordon himself had found. Batman wasn't just some vigilante out there in Gotham, looking from beyond the shadows. He wasn't just some person that he found either. He was just somebody whom, if Barbara Gordon, his own daughter, can trust and believe in, then he himself can probably believe in him too. This eventually is when Gordon and Batman will work together. Now, obviously, this was a while before Barbara Gordon would become Batgirl, and eventually Batgirl would become incapacitated by Joker. Her spine would become paralyzed from the waist down, confining her to a wheelchair, and with that, that's how Oracle came to be. But however, this was quite an ending that ensured once and for all, we don't truly have to be worried about Gordon anymore, or Joker for that matter. Because even though Joker would break free on a number of occasions even after this point, it's fair to say we truly have an established trust relationship between these characters. That's how the GCPD and Batman are able to work together for years to come. Of course, we can't go far without mentioning the DLC, which was about Mr. Freeze. And while I will say it does a decent job at allowing for Mr. Freeze to have some extra screen time, knowing what we saw in Batman Arkham City, it's a bit disappointing to note that this is not exactly what we would have figured when it comes to origin stories. We know that the origin stories did involve Batman in some cryogenic lab accident that forced Mr. Freeze to live in sub-zero temperatures for the rest of his life, and his wife Nora ended up getting some sort of incurable disease at the time. She had to be frozen in suspended animation for a time until Freeze could find out the cure for this issue. Of course, because of that accident that forced him to stay in sub-zero temperatures, this did sort of hinder his work, and he practically put a lot of blame on Batman as a result of this. So, while I will say that it's a decent way to put together a DLC for this game, it's probably not the best way to have Mr. Freeze's depiction in Origins, a story that's literally telling us the origins of how certain things happen. But then again, Arkham Origins didn't exactly originate with the true origins of Batman himself, like how as Bruce Wayne, when his parents were murdered in that alleyway, then that basically did lead to Batman being born. As he grew up, as he went to the League of Assassins, got some training done, and eventually donning the famous Batsuit. Origins does, of course, take place a couple years after he truly started his superhero career. But I do feel like that some things about it are a bit on the misleading end. But it's called Arkham Origins. More of the origins of Arkham, like how all the Arkham related stuff came to be, and more importantly, how did Batman's trust with Gordon and most of the other characters in the series evolve. So you can't really put a lot of blame on that part. As I've mentioned before though, this would not be the last game that came out, because in 2015 there was Arkham Knight. The game that practically began with Joker being cremated and allowing for Scarecrow to come back one final time, and probably in his best since Arkham Asylum. Even better than that even. And the fact is, he'd gone from being voiced by young Dino Andrade to John Noble, and that honestly was a unique transition. And Noble himself has had a lot of good voice acting over the years. But as I had talked about Arkham Knight in an entire video of HJ Super Graphics, I won't really make much more commentary on that. For Arkham Origins though, I'd say I'm quite satisfied with the way that I've been able to talk about this one. So, with that in mind, I give this origin story a good 8.5 out of 10.1. While both of the first two Arkham games were practically masterpieces, Origins unfortunately was just something that, while it was kind of a thing for the number 3 curse that unfolded, where sometimes the third entry in a franchise happens to be worse than the others. It's only sometimes that happens, because other times, number 3 could potentially be the best out of the bunch. I mean, take a look at Castlevania 3, Toy Story 3, or unexplainably there was also Psycho 3, which while it didn't do as good of a job as the others, it still did a lot better than what most people would have expected. And then of course, we can't really forget much about Bad Boys for Life in 2020, which was the 3rd film in the Bad Boys series. Or we could even talk about Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I mean, so many 3s nowadays happen to be doing way better than the others. I've even talked a bit about A Quiet Place Origins, which was basically the number 3 in the series, but much like some of the other 3s I've talked about, they happen to be prequels. I don't know what it is with number 3s being prequels rather than sequels, but at the same time, it does seem like a unique way to allow for us to go back into the story. And if you really want to talk about number 3s in video games, well, how about Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which is more of the prequel, the origin story of how Link got his powers and defeated Ganon for the first time. But the Legend of Zelda stuff is entirely different media that I might have to save up on for some other time. So with all that in mind, thank you for watching this piece of video games that are totally awesome. I do say Origins in the Arkham series was totally awesome, and while the other 3 did a lot better, Origins still held up in its own. Roger Craig Smith voicing Batman instead of Kevin Conroy was at least pretty well deserved. And then of course there was Troy Baker voicing his Joker, but nevertheless, all 4 of these games are amazing, by all means. But I'm probably going to move on to something different for tomorrow, so make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.